You're like everywhere. You can begin when ready. You can begin when you're ready. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Chair. And I want to thank you and your team for all the work on this bill. This has been about a year and a half of work, and but a lot of intense focus the last couple of months. I really appreciate it, and I appreciate all the amendments, and I think we are getting to a very good place, and I will certainly be accepting all the amendments and appreciate the work. A little bit of a longer statement. I'll try to condense a bit, but I think it's important just the context that we understand that this is a goal that we committed to thanks to your great work, Assembly Member, and everyone who supported it, that we set a goal of 2045 getting to net zero. So that goal is 85% direct emissions reductions, 15% carbon removal. And that means we'll be needing to remove at least 15% of 1990 emissions, which was 65 million tons per year to get to net zero. That's just the definition of net zero. So you can't get to net zero without carbon removal. The problem is we don't really have a plan to do that. And this bill directs CARB to create that plan and get started. Of course, again, it goes without saying, most of our effort and most of my legislation is focused on the other part, the emissions reductions. But that won't be enough to get to net zero, again, without carbon removal. And then it shouldn't be controversial. The IPCC has been telling us that carbon removal is essential for any 1.5 degree or even 2 degree pathway. The Biden administration has been incredibly active in this area. They have their own carbon negative shot program, the DOE. And the aim is driving down the cost of carbon removal below $100 a ton within a decade. And that's the goal. We're not going to drive the cost down without creating that long-term predictable market that can get entrepreneurs and investors to say, yes, we're going to invest in all these many, many nascent carbon removal technologies. And you'll probably hear about a few of those today. So the question is, how do we get there? This bill puts a framework in place for scaling up carbon dioxide removal, we also call it CDR, by addressing 3 issues. And I want to quickly go through those 3 issues. The first issue is, what should count towards net zero? If we're claiming net zero, it ought to be high quality carbon removal and not the kinds of questionable offsets that I know many of us have had issues with over the years. That's why this bill and a lot of the work that was done to establish rules to support a wide variety of CDR approaches, including both technological and nature-based solutions, as long as they meet certain standards, such as requirements for being verifiable and long-lasting. When we passed SB 905 in 2022, we established some requirements for CDR projects as part of a bill that was mostly focused on CCS and geologic storage. SB 308 expands on those rules to make sure that many different pathways for CDR are supported, not just those using geological storage, while making sure that CARB establishes rules for each CDR approach to ensure the quality. Second question. So first, again, what should count? Second, what guardrails do we need to protect communities and the environment from any impacts from CDR projects? Here, 905 was a great start, included strong protections for neighboring communities. This bill requires that all CDR processes approved by CARB for use in meeting the state's target, whether located in state or elsewhere, to meet equivalent standards to the extent feasible. The bill also includes some other guardrails to make sure that we are only supporting good kinds of CDR, such as, for example, for biomass, only waste biomass feedstocks, to avoid having CDR lead to deforestation or conversion of cropland to grow crops, specifically for carbon removal, et cetera, et cetera. So that was the second area that we covered. The third question is, how do we create incentives for CDR to scale up, right? How do we create those incentives? Again, so entrepreneurs will continue to innovate, investors will continue to invest. We bring the cost down just like we've done for solar. This bill, originally was very focused and very prescriptive on the polluter pays model. This bill defers to CARB the best way to determine to create those incentives, but it does require CARB to create interim targets. so that we can see the path to net zero and tell whether we are on the track to get there. It requires CARB to aim for CDR equivalent to 1% of emissions in 2030. That's about 2.5 million tons, 1% of emissions in 2030, which should provide a strong market signal to support private sector investment in CDR solutions. It also requires CARB to set separate targets for both emissions reductions and for carbon removal, so we can see we're on track to meeting both of those targets separately, and making sure, again, that carbon removal is scaling up in addition to emissions reductions, not instead of them. I want to thank the chair and committee staff again for the tremendous work on this. Just in conclusion, I know that carbon removal is a relatively new topic, and over time, it was even myself when I first started getting confused with carbon capture. But it was, while a new topic is an important one, we need to continue to focus on emission reductions, but that won't be enough. We need to get started now on CDR. Just like it took us 20 years of policy support to scale up solar and get a low cost generation today, we should expect it to take that many years to scale up and reduce the cost of CDR. I respectfully ask for I vote and have two great witnesses here with me today.
2 minutes each.
Hello, Chair and members. My name is Haley Leslie Bowl. On behalf of the World Resources Institute, we are a global environmental research organization. I sit on WRI's carbon removal team, where I manage our work on nature-based carbon removal and biomass carbon removal. The IPCC and WRI's own research has found that carbon removal will be necessary at a large scale to complement deep and rapid emissions reductions if the world is going to prevent catastrophic climate change. Carbon removal, including both nature-based strategies and engineered strategies, will also be essential if California and the nation are going to meet their climate targets. SB 308 presents an opportunity for California to lead the nation in building and expanding critically important carbon removal to the scale required to meet these targets. California has set robust emissions reductions targets in 2022, but to reach net zero emissions, California must also set targets for removing carbon. In 2045, carbon removal will be needed to counterbalance the hardest to eliminate emissions to allow the state to meet its net zero target. Between now and 2045, the state must work to support diverse pathways to meet its carbon removal targets. There are many approaches to removing carbon, and just as many companies are looking to increase the scale of the carbon removal that they can offer. SB 308 is technology neutral, so it directs CARB to support any carbon removal pathway that meets criteria for quality, ensures that removed carbon stays out of the atmosphere, and adheres to community and environmental safety rules established by CARB. This includes technological approaches like direct air capture and nature-based removals pathways like reforestation, as well as approaches that use sustainable biomass waste and residues to permanently sequester the carbon that plants pull out of the air as they grow. Many of these approaches offer environmental benefits beyond carbon removal and can help the state manage the threat of catastrophic wildfire. SB 308 creates a necessary framework for California to set and attain targets for high-quality, responsible carbon removal that is safe and complements the state's comprehensive emissions reductions.
Thank you so much. 2 minutes.
Members of the committee, I'm Dr. Corey Myers. I'm an engineer, scientist, and analyst at Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory. I'm here today to give you accurate and unbiased information on carbon dioxide removal. So here it is. If you want to keep global warming to 2 degrees C, or maybe bring it down to lower, more reasonable temperatures one day, you need carbon dioxide removal. There's no two ways about it. Typically, you'll hear about 2 or 3 methods, but in reality, there are dozens and dozens of options out there. So I'd like to give you a taste of what's possible in California. We have rocks across the state that naturally pull CO2 out of the air and turn it into a rock. We have brines, both natural and from desalination, that you can extract more water out of for agriculture while taking CO2 out of the air and getting rid of that brine waste. And then we have, forest management waste that you can convert into hydrogen for industry while taking CO2 out of the air and reducing wildfire risk. And as I said, there's lots more options out there. These are being developed by government and academia, but also startups, mom and pop operations, and large corporations. But it doesn't matter who's developing it or how amazing the technology seems. For these to become actual businesses, you need financing. And to get financing, what a bank needs to see is a long-term stable market. So that's why I'm really encouraged by what I hear in the legislature. I'm here to answer any questions you have on the subject, and I appreciate your time and your thought on this matter.
Thank you so much. Any persons in the hearing room who would like to register their support for this measure?
Good afternoon, Chair. Martin Radosevich on behalf of Heirloom Carbon Technologies in strong support. I'd like to thank the author for his leadership on this.
Good evening, Bonnie Benuel with the Climate Center. We have a support if amended position on the bill and like to thank the authors, staff, and committee staff for continuing to work through our issues. Thank you. Marjorie Lee on behalf of Ed Carvin in strong support.
Jonathan Cole on behalf of Climate Action California, also on behalf of Citizens Climate Lobby California, Reality Project California Coalition, Santa Cruz Climate Action Network, 350 Sacramento, and 350 Humboldt in support.
Good evening, Caitlin Rodner-Sutter on behalf of Environmental Defense Fund in support. We support the amendments in the analysis and also especially clarifying that nature-based climate solutions are part of this. So thank you.
Good evening, Ashley Arax on behalf of the Clean Air Task Force in support. Thank you.
Peter Chargan, I'm a private citizen, lived in California my entire life, in strong support. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Any persons here in opposition to this measure? Anyone ready?
Good evening, Chair and members. My name is Katie Valenzuela on behalf of the Central Valley Air Quality Coalition and several other environmental and EJ groups with an opposed unless amended position. We do want to thank the author for his earnest engagement in these last 6 weeks, as well as committee staff for continuing to hear our concerns. Really, we're asking you to pass this bill today with a clear commitment from the author to continue to work with us on our outstanding issues, which are small in number. The biggest two issues that we have right now are making sure that additionality is met. In other words, if any of those credits are sold for the low carbon fuel standard, that goes to the 85%, not the 15%. We want to make sure this is rigorous. We also have concerns about the definition of eligible biomass that we'd like to see addressed, as well as ensuring that the language, this bill leans heavily on the protections you all passed in 2022 and SB 905. CARB has yet to implement any of those rules, which means projects are moving forward today with none of those protections in place. The language in the bill today attempts to address that. It's a little bit too little too late. So we'd like to continue trying to strengthen that language to ensure it's meaningful and that those protections are in place. A couple of our just smaller things, making sure community benefits are real and actualized, and ensuring that CARB uses the tools at their disposal so that any CDR that counts towards this target meets the standards in this bill. They're not currently doing that with the enhanced oil recovery ban in SB 905. So we want to make sure that that doesn't continue in implementation of this measure. But with that, we're very hopeful that we can meet a resolution on this with the commitment from the author today. And thank you for hearing us.
Mr. Chair and members, Dan Chaw for the California Chamber of Commerce. Regrettably, the Chamber is opposed to this bill unless it is amended to clarify that a regulated entity is not subject to double or triple jeopardy scenario, where it is regulated twice or even thrice for the same emissions. I've been meaning to use that word in testimony. We greatly appreciate how far the Senate has come in the most recent amendments, and I think there's not a whole lot of daylight between us conceptually in the need for this technology, as previously explained, to get us to carbon neutrality and to send the appropriate market signals. However, today, some members of the regulated community are subject to cap and trade, low carbon fuel standard, or both. And we'd like to avoid yet another regulatory requirement to reduce or remove the same emissions when there may be more cost-effective solutions available. Otherwise, the impact could be felt, particularly by consumers, in the form of higher costs. Much like this legislature did when it passed cap and trade to ensure cost containment in that program, we believe similar guardrails should be put in place in this bill to protect consumers. Ideally, this program would be incentive-based, just like other clean energy programs that helped nascent technologies reduce costs and scale in order to achieve solutions that don't need the market for support. And at the very least, we would urge an amendment that gives regulated entities the discretion to choose which regulatory pathway makes the most sense for this business. For these reasons, we regretfully oppose to this bill.
Thank you so much. Any persons in the hearing room who'd like to register their opposition to this measure?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members. Virgil Welch, California Carbon Solutions Coalition. We actually have a neutral position on this bill. However, based on the committee analysis and the proposed amendments that the author mentioned, we do have a concern about inclusion of any dates in this bill that would delay implementation of 905. So as was previously mentioned, 905 is already slow moving. That is a critical program to support technologies like both CDR and carbon capture. So would like to make sure that modifications pursuant to the committee analysis.
That was a creative way to get around name, organization, and position on the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Keith Dunn, State Building Construction Trades Council, opposed unless the men were concerned about the carbon capture impacts. Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Asha Sharma on behalf of Leadership Council for Justice and Accountability, and we are opposed unless amended on the bill, but we appreciate the author's efforts to work with us on the bill. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman and members, Eloy Garcia for the Western States Petroleum Association, also an opposed unless amended position.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Chairman, members, Theo Perez with Calpine, generally supportive of everything that's being said here, but also very much worried about that date and hope we get some clarification on that. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
I actually have one other tweener position. Melissa Romero, California Environmental Voters. We have an other tweener position on this bill, but we are working with the groups, environmental and environmental justice groups, on the changes being made. Thank you to the senator. So looking forward to continue working with everyone.
Thank you so much. We'll turn it back to committee members. Questions, comments, concerns. Mr. Marisucci.
Senator, this is bringing back traumatic memories of when I was trying to thread the needle between, adopting aggressive climate action goals while at the same time facing the combined concerns, if not opposition, from oil, trades, and environmental justice groups.
We like to bring people together.
That's right.
Bring people together.
I respect all the work that you've done in this space, especially in terms of, recognizing that the only way that we can save the planet is by driving innovation here in the state of California. And I see that as the heart of your effort here. I wanted to ask you if you can respond to Councilwoman Valenzuela's, call for a commitment as to, did you say it, additionality?
Yeah, we have about 5 amendments outstanding. Yes.
Okay.
Well, additionalities. So thank you. And again, thank you for your work. And so, yeah, we're bringing people together. But I think we've come a long way, actually, both with the Environmental Justice Committee and with folks like the building trades and the chamber. And I can address their concerns as well. I would say, as was mentioned, I think we've worked very closely together. We've come a long way. I think the additionality is certainly critical to us. So I venture to say we're happy to do anything regarding additionality. And I think some of the other concerns that are raised were pretty close.
Okay. Out of respect for you, I will be supporting this bill.
Yeah.
Thank you. And I appreciate the scientists being here. I think I was briefed. I represent the lab, so I was briefed immediately after they did the report on how we solve our climate crisis. And it's, for those that haven't read it, I think an incredibly important report for people to read, because their entire mission is national security. And they believe that the climate crisis is one of the largest threats to our national security, and that we need to really do an all of the above approach. And one of the things I appreciate about the report is it also does sort of a cost benefit analysis. So it really recommends the low cost things, even though maybe they don't have as much benefit, and then talks about the importance of these more expensive investments because of the huge impact they can have. So with that lens, one of the things that I've learned in my conversations with the lab, although you can dispute me if you'd like, is that we need to use it both to pull additional carbon out of the air, as the bill says, But then we also, because we're not turning off our oil refineries overnight, we also need to be using it to capture current emissions. So not to drive up the emissions, but to capture current emissions. And I guess I wanted to clarify whether the bill does that, because as I read this, when it says that it has to meet all, they can only certify certain processes that meet all of the following requirements. And the first one is that it results in removal of CO2 from the atmosphere directly or indirectly, and not only the avoidance or reduction of emissions. So I do actually think we need to be doing capture as it relates to avoidance.
Yeah. So so this is a separate bill, right? Separate issue. That's why this is focused on because carbon capture is handled separately through, is basically really considered on the other side of a direct emissions reduction. So that's why this is separate and very clear of saying that this is net negative, right? And that's a term that
Right, but shouldn't we be also, I guess, net negative? So that's what I'm trying to figure out here.
Yeah.
Is that carbon capture and carbon dioxide removal, like net negative? So you mean like it doesn't get us to zero from where we are today. It has to go further than that, is what you're saying, I think is my understanding. And so why that? Why not get us to zero? Zero seems great. Zero seems like a laudable goal.
Well, the problem is, again, even by our own scoping plan, if by some heroic effort by those assembled here, we're actually able to meet our 2045 goals, CARB still says we'll have 65 million metric tons a year of carbon emissions.
Right.
If we're incredibly successful, right, in the track that we're not quite on yet to meet. And so we're going to need, even to get to net zero, we'll need 65 million metric tons a year, right? Which now we have very little. But then also to stave off the worst effects of climate change, we're going to have to start going even below that, right? We actually want to be removing carbon net. And this is California, right? You think what the rest of the world is doing, right? So, but because we're California, we're big enough to drive down the cost of these technologies, whether it's ocean alkalization, whether it's biomass technologies, whether it's the kind of reverse cement process that some of us have been out to sort of see. We're going to drive down the cost of all those, and others will benefit as well. But it's not enough to get to net zero, right? Even if you put carbon capture on every emitting facility today, you're still going to have plastics pollution and other production, other things, and again, ultimately, we have to get even below that.
Right, but this would say, maybe that's why I might be misreading it. So I actually invite you to correct me if I'm wrong. I just want to be clear, Senator. But this says that if some projects just get us to zero, those can't be certified, as I understand it. But maybe I'm wrong.
Well, again, it's not about any avoided emission. So it's nothing qualified. If you're putting a carbon capture project on an emission, like that doesn't qualify for this bill.
Right, but if you are emitting carbon dioxide, right? I mean, people emit that. So you could use carbon dioxide removal to counter that. Am I wrong? Am I getting this wrong?
That's, if I may, that's part of what I was trying to address in my additionality concern.
Yes.
Because in theory, many carbon removal projects may decide to sell some credits off into the low carbon fuel standard, for instance. So compliance entities can purchase those credits to say we've met the target. So that's why we wanted to make sure if we're dual tracking, we're counting that carbon there and this carbon here. This bill only has to do with the 15% because 905 already regulates a lot of the carbon capture at industrial sources. So what we were trying to, that's why we want to make sure that they're counted separately in the truest sense.
Got it. So these are separate projects that are not
Separate,
associated with emissions.
Right.
Which is why you want them to be net negative instead of neutral.
Right. Yeah. So this is what you see is like the big, that when you think of as traditional air capture, like the big, this the big thing sucking carbon out of the atmosphere, or other nature-based solutions, other things, but not. It's not CCS. It's
right.
Not,
but even, I mean, I guess maybe are there emitters who? I get the difference between CCS and CDR, but I imagine if you're emitting, you could use this process instead of CCS, or would you not? Would you just use CCS? I guess, correct me. Again, I'm learning.
It's almost always cheaper to not use carbon dioxide removal.
Okay, so for cost reasons, they're going to use CCS.
Yes.
Okay, that makes sense. Okay.
Now, there are some instances like agriculture where there's no way to capture the emissions that are coming off of that. And there are some instances like large industrial sectors, which are it might be more cost effective to use CDR to offset that last little bit for specifics around each industry. But in general, it's going to be cheaper for you to decarbonize in every other way possible besides CDR. CDR is really just that backstop.
Got it. Okay. So it's mostly a cost issue, which is why you would go to CCS first. I guess I understand. Now, in those instances, right, where you had an agricultural setting or something like that, and there are other ways in some ag settings to capture, I guess I still see the benefit in going to zero, but I appreciate what you're trying to do here. I just want to make sure we're opening up all the pathways to get to our goals, because I don't see us getting to our goals right now. And so I think it's what you're doing is really important, and I don't want it to be too narrow that it doesn't help us achieve those goals. So that's what I was concerned about, but I'm happy to support it today.
Well, innocent member, if I may, the point of that was to not create an operation that nets zero. So you could imagine with construction, with transport of carbon after the fact, with the operation of a facility, there is carbon that's associated with that. So the goal is, if you're saying you're doing CDR, the actual net needs to be negative. So that's why that language is in there, so that we don't have a project that's maybe just spinning through a process that's actually generating as much carbon as it's capturing. And so that's the only reason that language is in here. It's a very narrow set of circumstances where that would occur, but I think they're trying to ensure that this, if you say you're doing carbon capture, you're actually capturing some carbon at the end, and that it's not getting canceled out by other emissions in process, if that makes sense. Yeah.
You know, great questions. Any other questions from committee members? Mr. Lackey.
Yeah, this proposed legislation seems to allow CARB to implement the program however they choose. And I would hope that it's not intended to negatively impact consumers. They're not being spoken very much in this committee so far. Are you willing in any way to put any kind of consumer protections so as to not negatively impact energy costs?
Certainly willing to consider anything. I mean, certainly we had a much more prescriptive bill originally when this started, sort of 2 years ago. And I think for a whole bunch of reasons, for a whole bunch of stakeholders, including CARB itself, the decision was made really to go back to them. But yeah, it doesn't mandate how they do it. But I think they've had a, they're certainly trying to consider those impacts if you look at some of the other things that they're doing. So happy to look at anything, but that's certainly not the intention. We're not trying to raise prices or telling them they have to do it a certain way.
I can appreciate that you're not trying to, but I think it's very likely to result in that. And I appreciate your honesty. Thank you.
Yeah. And again, I'll say just this is already part of our policy, right? We already say that we need CDR. This is really just trying to operationalize and create the pathway.
Seeing no other questions from committee members, Senator, would you like to close?
Again, thank you for the robust discussion. This is, you've seen like the tip of the iceberg of the conversations that have been going on over the last 6 weeks. But again, I appreciate your effort and the efforts of your team. I think we're getting a good place in a really first of the nation bill. I mean, this is something that the nation and the world is having to struggle with. And sometimes we do things that are very specific to California, but this is something that will have global impact. And we're just trying to find the right balance to get there. And I appreciate your work and respectfully ask for my vote.
Well, thank you, Senator. You and I have toured some direct carbon removal sites. I think I aligned my comments with a variety of things I've heard somewhere kind of in the broader scheme, a tweener.
Yeah.
I think there are ways that this could be a needed and tremendously beneficial approach to achieving our long-term goals. I think it's also one of those things that we've got to set up and do right. Otherwise, we're just building something else that we've got to bring down later. If I could think of an author who would be the right person to kind of lead that conversation and to bring folks together and do it in a thoughtful, meaningful, and intentional way, I think you would be that guy. And so this bill has a do pass recommendation today. Madam Secretary, can we call the roll? Do we have a motion? Mr. Marsucci in a second. Ms. Pellerin.
The motion is due pass as amended to appropriations. Bryan?
Aye.
Bryan, aye. Flora? Bauer Cahan? Connolly? Connolly, aye. Friedman? Aye. Friedman, I. Hoover. No. Hoover, no. Calra. Calra, I. Lackey.
Sorry, no.
Lackey, no. Meritsucci. Meritsucci, I. Pellerin. Pellerin, I. Wicks. Wicks, I. Wood. Wood, I.
A votes. That bill is out, Mr. Becker. Senator Padilla. Come on down, brother. Whenever you're ready.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and committee members. I'm happy to present SB 1208. I want to thank the committee for working with my staff and begin by clarifying that I will accept committee amendments from the Assembly Committee on Environmental Safety and Toxic Materials to be processed in this committee. Mr. Chairman and members, SB 1208 would prohibit the Regional Water Board from issuing a waste discharge permit to any new landfill that is located within the Tijuana River National Estuarine Research Reserve or within an area that is a tributary to the Tijuana River and its watershed, unless both the Secretary of EPA and the Regional Board make specific high standard findings based on a specific evidentiary standard that to the effect that any discharge from such proposed Class 3 landfills would not harm or otherwise adversely affect the Tijuana River watershed. There is precedent in statute for the legislature prescribing conditions under which the Regional Board cannot issue a discharge permit because